I bet you guys didn't know that anorexia claims more lives than any other psychiatric disorder. That's insane. And yet it's so underreported, underdiagnosed. Many people live with it in secret. It's kind of obvious once it gets into its later stages, but by that time, a lot of the damage has been done emotionally and physically. So that is 10,200 deaths annually due to eating disorders, not just anorexia, but all of them. 52 minutes, one person is dying from an eating disorder in this country. And latest statistics say 16% of adults in emergency rooms screened positive for an eating disorder. I've been working in nutrition for almost 30 years. I've been in recovery for almost 40 years from drugs and alcohol and anorexia. And I feel like those numbers are still greatly unreported, underreported, and recovery rates are still not great for eating disorders. The numbers I found are 50% with anorexia achieve full recovery with appropriate treatment, and 20 to 30% achieve partial recovery. But then they're saying like only 38% stay sober from alcohol and drugs using the 12-step model, which is Alcoholics Anonymous. And we don't really know because it's anonymous. So what I can go by is my experience over all these years working with people with these issues and myself, and spending a lot of time in 12-step meetings and writing a book about eating disorder recovery and alcoholism. What I can say is not enough people are getting treatment for eating disorders, and they're not getting correct treatment. And the reason is mostly political. It's politics, it's money, property, and prestige. It is the food industry, the junk food industry, the industry that makes all these addictive foods, blocking the people who can help. It's part of why I stopped working in mental health. I stopped going to college to become a child psychiatrist because I realized what the food was doing, and that back in the early 90s, nobody really was paying attention to it. There was a few doctors who I was following at the time, but we didn't have the internet really. We didn't have any of the resources we have now. And it wasn't even being acknowledged, yet they were feeding these kids. I worked with pediatrics, soda, Coke and Mountain Dew and bacon and donuts and nitrites and like sugary foods and all the stuff. And then when they like have issues within 2 hours of meals, we know why that is, right? So I switched my career. I wound up going into my eating disorder after my recovery from alcohol and drugs. And that one could bring you down, you guys. You can maybe maintain a little longer, but it blocks you. It blocks you from the recovery that you need to recover from a disease, in my opinion. The disease of alcoholism, drug addiction, food addiction, anorexia. With that, I was addicted to the control of controlling my body. I also became a nutritionist. Woohoo, big surprise, right? And I like to fix people. So there's a lot of stuff. I grew up in a family of chaos and addiction and alcoholism. And for me, I needed to apply the same principles. And what happens is the same principles of 12 steps to my eating disorder recovery. And I got very lucky that I was able to find enough people to do that. There are 12-step programs for eating disorder recovery and food addiction and eating issues. The problem is they are not professionals. They're not supposed to be. And the food industry marketing companies and the American Nutrition and Dietetic Association got involved, and money is involved. So they're getting paid, and certain MFCCs and MSWs and people in the psych field, psychiatrists, have been paid just like they were way back to say that sugar is not addictive. They've been paid to say that if you are an eating disorder professional, and if you tell these patients that food is an addiction, you're going to make their addiction worse. You're going to make them afraid to eat. Well, first of all, they're already doing that, a lot of them. Second of all, that's BS. That they need to know that not all foods are addictive. Their thing is all foods fit. You have to eat 3 meals a day. And before anybody can leave anorexia treatment or binge eating treatment or bulimia, they are literally forced to go and eat ice cream, to go and eat chips, to go and eat their trigger foods. That's like saying to me, hey, let's do some speedballs before you graduate from this program. That's ridiculous. And yes, I was an alcoholic and a serious drug addict. I grew up with it around me, and that's the truth. I haven't used anything since I was 19 years old when I got sober, but it took me a couple years of trying, and I could have easily died or wound up in prison in that time. So we'll get back to that in another time. What I'm trying to put forth here is if you are suffering, and also they lump in obesity with food addiction. And obesity could be caused by other things, not just food addiction, but usually obesity is very well in there with food addiction. We often have celiac and other gut issues and brain issues and medication issues, but food addiction creates big bodies and obesity. And with anorexia and bulimia, it's a little easier to hide for a while. But with food addiction, it's deadly and it's chronic and it's happening to children. And if we keep allowing the industry, the dietetics industry, the dietitians to be trained to lie for the food companies and say that food addiction doesn't exist and that is hurting people to tell them it exists, we are going to continue to lose people. We are going to continue to have people waste lives like some of my clients, 20, 30 years. That's about as long as they make it with severe anorexia. They're not getting better. They're wasting their entire lives on that, just like alcoholism or drug addiction. And I hate that. Or they have a heart attack, they die, they overshoot medication, like they die. And a lot of people are addicted to drugs, alcohol, and they have food issues and a lot of other issues. Here is the gist of it. If you have a food addiction and or an eating disorder, just like if you have a drug addiction and an alcoholism, these are diseases of what we call a spiritual malady. A spiritual malady means you have this God-shaped hole inside you. That hole needs to be filled. And we have learned to use things to manage our brain chemistry, and it's never going to work. We're never going to fill that spiritual gap or that spiritual hole with anything other than a spiritual solution. And I'm not saying you need to get religion. I'm not saying you need to join a church or get God. You do not. What you need to do is go to a 12-step meeting and try to find a higher power, something outside of yourselves. What we get high on or what we get stable on, which gave me enough time to get off alcohol and drugs, which were around me all the time. I literally got them for free in my own home as a child. What allowed me to come off of them was having the fellowship and the 12 step. And the 12 step is the one where we go out and we try to help other people and we're part of this movement for good. That filled that spiritual lack that I had had since childhood. I remember feeling deeply depressed from a very young age because my mother was mentally ill and suicidal, because my father was awesome, but he was a drug dealer. I didn't know it at the time, but I grew up in chaos and insanity and neglect and some abuse. And when kids grow up like that, they're going to look for a way to self-medicate. And food is our very first drug. It's literally what your parents bring home for your birthday. Here's a cake. And you're like, woohoo, all those neurons start firing. You get a big hit of dopamine. And that's what the food companies are creating these foods for. And just like big tobacco, which we think now is a drug, just like alcohol, they are not going to stand for us saying that food addiction is real. They are not going to stand for us cutting into their profits if they can. So all of us need to be out here screaming and waking people up about the fact food addiction is real. You can quit addictive foods. There's a 12-step program called Overeaters Anonymous where they give up white things. They give up sugary, starchy carbs that trigger people, and they eat a measured amount of food. That program also allows you to work with someone like me, not a registered dietitian who has no freaking clue and who's going to tell you because she was trained wrong, not because she's a bad person, but she's going to tell you, you can have a Twix bar. You cannot have a Twix bar if you are a true sugar addict or a true food addict. You cannot have an Oreo cookie because if you're like me, you will not stop at one. And honestly, it's not worth it. It's literally like taking a hit of crack for many people. There are people who feel nothing from alcohol or certain drugs. They throw away their pain pills after a surgery, but they will kill for another piece of cake. They will literally take it back out of the trash after they've thrown it away. So, um, I just want to know who knew this, who is it new for, who wants to argue with me? Like, let's start talking about this stuff because people are dying from it, seriously, and it doesn't have to happen. I'm grateful to be in recovery. I know many people who are also in recovery. If you're suffering with it, if you know family members or friends, tell them to follow, tell them to watch. I don't mind giving this stuff away for free because I'm going to retire soon, honestly, and people need to know this before that happens. So follow me, Juli Keene, nutritionist, the Los Angeles Nutritionist on most channels.